Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We apologize for the delay. Welcome to the launch of the Chinese edition of the WTO's 2019 World Trade Report entitled The Future of Services Trade. Services comprise between 70 and 80% of jobs and output globally, but in terms of trade, services lags behind. Trade in goods in 2018 was almost 4 times larger than trade in services. And although trade in services has grown faster than trade in goods since 2005, services traders face trade costs that are nearly twice as high as those for trade in goods. Indeed, the full extent of services' contribution to global trade is not well understood. So in this 2019 edition of our World Trade Report, our economists have endeavored well to explain services trade and to shed some light on how this trade may evolve in the future. Our keynote speakers today are our Director General Roberto Azevedo and Ambassador Zhang Shangchen, the Ambassador of China to the WTO. Our guest speaker is Mr. Chong, the Chairman of the China Society for WTO Studies. We will be joined a little bit later by our Chief Economist, Bob Koopman. I turn the floor over to Director General Azevedo. You have the floor, please.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I am very, very pleased to be here to help launch the Chinese version of the 2019 World Trade Report. Now, this is the second year in a row that this report has been translated into Chinese. And this is an important step in making this report more accessible to Chinese speakers. It also helps to showcase the work of the WTO to a broader audience. And I would like to commend the Chinese authorities, in particular Minister Zhang, for this important initiative. The World Trade Report is the WTO's flagship publication on global trade issues. Every year, it identifies and examines in detail an important issue in global trade. Now, this time around, the topic is the future of services trade. And the report looks at how it has evolved in the last years and what trends and opportunities we're likely to see in the future. From logistics to finance or informatics, services are indispensable in our economies. They generate more than 2/3 of economic output, and they account for more than 2/3 of jobs in developing countries and over 4/5 of employment in developed countries. Services also play an increasingly important role in international trade. Global value chains for merchandise could not function without logistics or communications. And thanks to digitalization, services that once required face-to-face interaction, like certain medical services, for example, now they can feasibly be delivered from a distance, even across borders. Still, services are often overlooked in discussions on global trade. Now, the extent of their contribution to global trade is not always fully appreciated, and the World Trade Report aims precisely to address this gap. The WTO's chief economist, Bob Koopman, as mentioned by Mr. Rockwell, will guide you through the main findings in a moment, but I would just like to highlight a few figures that underline services' importance in global trade. The report shows, for example, that services trade has grown 5.4% per year on average since 2005. Now, this is faster than trade in goods, which grew at 4.6% on average. In developing economies, services make up a growing share of trade. Developing countries' share of global services trade has grown by more than 10 percentage points since 2005. Now, also importantly is the fact that this report also contains new trade data that captures ways of supplying services not covered in traditional statistics. In particular, This refers to services delivered by a company that has a commercial presence in another country, like an office or a subsidiary. And once we take this kind of commercial presence into account, we find that services trade was worth around $13.3 trillion in 2017. Now, this would put the share of services in global trade 20 percentage points higher than the traditional estimates that we have before us. Now, going beyond the figures, services trade matters for welfare and social inclusion. It helps to increase scale economics, consumer choice, and firm-level competitiveness. It also helps to promote inclusiveness in the economy. Services trade play a prominent role, for example, in women's employment and offers many opportunities for smaller companies. At the same time, challenges persist. So trade costs in services are about twice as high as those in goods. Policy barriers, including trade barriers, are still a challenge in many places. So tackling these obstacles and seizing these opportunities will require policy action at all levels. Creating a wider and more informed debate about these issues is an essential first step. And I think the World Trade Report is a significant contribution to these efforts. So once again, I want to thank everyone who was involved in producing and also, of course, translating this important publication in Chinese. And I hope you will make good use of it. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today. And I urge you all to take the time to read the report. It's really interesting. I recommend. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Director General. I now give the floor to Ambassador Zhang. Ambassador Zhang, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Keith. Good morning. Mr. Director General, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the launch of the Chinese version of WTO World Trade Report 2019. I'm very honored to witness this special moment with Director General Roberto Azevedo and Mr. Chong, my long-term colleague and friend, the President of China Society for the WTO, and it's his institute organized the translation of the Chinese version of the WTO report. This is the second consecutive year that the WTO and the Ministry of Commerce of China jointly launched the Chinese version report during CIIE, which demonstrates China's strong support to the multilateral trading system and its deep integration into the economic globalization. This year's report focuses on the involvement and the future of trade in services, and I would like to take this opportunity to share with you some observations through my reading of this comprehensive, informative, and insightful report. First, the new data set of TISMOs developed by the WTO helps members rediscover services trade. The report used the experimental TISMOs data set to provide, for the first time, an overall picture of international services trade, covering 4 models of supply as defined in gas. With the inclusion of a commercial presence, as the DG just said, the report suggests that the services trade was actually $13.3 trillion in 2017, accounting for nearly half of the world trade and 20% higher than traditional estimates. This provides strong evidence why services trade really matters for global trade, and I believe it is one of the most important and encouraging findings of the report. Second, services trade is evolving fast, and we must seize the opportunities created by technological changes. The report predicts that digitalization will promote services trade tremendously in years to come by driving costs down, with which I fully concur. Taking China as an example, digital technology has completely reshape the business models, making services that one had to deliver face-to-face now can be delivered remotely. Today, China has more than 592 million online shoppers and 232 million online education users, and the number is still growing rapidly. How can this great untapped potential be realized, particularly for developing members? The report's answer is that if developing members are able to adopt digital technologies, their share in global services trade will increase by about 15%. Third, the inclusiveness of a services trade is something that we should pay more attention to. Trading services is critical for developing members and small and medium-sized enterprises to participate in global trade. However, according to the report, the share of world services trade by developing economies merely reached 25% of world exports, and LDCs only account for 0.3%. To improve this situation requires tremendous efforts from WTO members. For instance, to jointly develop a set of more inclusive-oriented rules on services trade. Capacity building could play a vital role in this process. The rapid development of China's services trade has been referred many times in this report. It's true that China's services trade has experienced a leapfrog development of the last 2 decades. Since China's accession to the WTO, China's services trade has increased from $71.9 billion in 2001 to $791.9 billion in 2018, an increase of more than 10 times. Meanwhile, China's opening up also offers unprecedented market access opportunities for services suppliers from the rest of the world. This year, China formally adopted a pre-established national treatment plus an active list management system for foreign investment and removed the equity cap in the sectors of life insurance, securities, futures, and fund management. We are committed to further liberalizing more services sectors, such as telecommunications and the Internet. In the WTO, we also play an active role in promoting discussions on e-commerce, investment facilitation, and services domestic regulation. In conclusion, this report is a timely and useful guidebook for China's further opening up and development in services sectors. Looking ahead, by embracing liberalization and the facilitation of services trade, China will continue to work with other WTO members to build a community of shared future with extensive converging interests and a high degree of interdependence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Zhang. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Chong of the China Society for WTO Studies. Mr. Chong, you have the floor, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 尊敬的阿泽维德总干事、向腾大使、女士们、先生们，大家上午好！非常高兴中文版2019年世界贸易报告正式出版。世界贸易报告是世界贸易组织的年度旗舰出版物，每一年度报告都围绕着国际经贸领域的一个重大主题进行深入的前瞻性的分析。报告的最后还列出了历年世界贸易报告的核心主题概览。2019年报告的主题是服务贸易的未来发展。报告中根据世界贸易组织实验性的新统计方法，指出了服务贸易在全球贸易和经济中的重要性被长期低估，并认为随着技术的进步，技术贸易方式和成本将呈下降趋势。未来服务贸易将面临更大发展。同时，由于服务贸易监管的复杂性，各国应积极参与服务领域的国际合作。报告的内容，我们期待库普曼先生的介绍。
With respect to the content of the report, we are looking forward to the introduction of Mr. Koopman. It is fair to say that this report is a bellwether of the future development of world trade. all walks of life of the society pay high attention to this report. Since China's succession to the WTO, China stays committed to the work of the WTO as well as the work outcomes of the WTO. We'd like to thank the authorization of the WTO so that from 2017 we were able to translate and publish the Chinese translation of the World Report. Especially during the last year's CIIE, we published the 2018 Chinese version of the World Trade Report. Shortly after the launch of the English version of the report. So it is fair to say that it is an urgent task to publish the Chinese version. So I'd like to extend our gratitude to Director General Azevedo, Deputy Director General, different institutions, and chief economists. I'd like also to thank Ambassador Zhang for his coordination, and Minister Zhang of Commerce, and Vice Minister Wang Shouwen of Commerce. I'd like to also thank Deputy Director General Fu Xinguo, Hong Xiaodong, and also the support of WTO's institutions in China. Finally, I'd like to thank our translation team. Because of their very efficient work, we are able to deliver this report. Their names are also included in the report and not to list their names. I fully recommend you to read this report. I believe it will be a rewarding journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chong. I'd now like to ask Bob Koopman, our chief economist, to join us on the panel. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Keith. I would like to add my congratulations to Ambassador Zhang, to Mr. Chong, for the significant efforts and support of translation of our report into Chinese. I think it's a very valuable activity and exposes our research and analysis to a much broader group of people. I have just a few minutes, about 10, I believe, to give you an overview of about 220 pages of our report. So I decided I would pick just a few elements from the report and reiterate some of the things that you've heard from both Director General Azevedo and Ambassador Zhang. But I would like to also point out that the report is very timely, particularly for China. China is undergoing a massive transformation from an investment and manufacturing-led economy to a services and consumption-led economy. And we now provide a baseline for services trade where China's economic evolution is increasingly moving towards that. And we see that in the data, and we've done some research to suggest this is going to be very important in the future. So I believe that this report will stand the test of time and provide a foundation, a good starting point for monitoring the evolution of China's engagement in services trade. So as you heard, services trade has been increasing faster than goods trade, 5.4% versus 4.6%. I will rain on this parade a little in that in this past year we have seen both goods trade and services trade growth slow as a result of slowing economic growth and as well as increasing trade tensions. We have a indicator that was originally developed under the China G20 presidency. We call it the we're changing the name, but it's the trades. Now I'm forgetting. Keith, help me here. What's the name of our quarterly trade?
Oh, the trade barometer.
Trade barometer. We changed the name recently, so I'm sorry. But this is a real-time indicator, and we've just rolled out a new trade barometer for services. Both of those indicators show that this historical growth since 2005 is now not occurring. So we have great challenges in the trade world, and particularly for goods, but also for services being adversely affected by economic developments. You also heard that trade through Mode 3, commercial presence in another country, is very important. And you can see here that it accounts for about 59% of global services trade, whereas cross-border transactions are about 28%. And I'm going to emphasize here that the digital technology is critical for all modes of supply, but also for commercial presence in another country, because often those affiliates operating in a foreign country need to be digitally connected to the home headquarters. So the role of technology in expanding trade growth in all modes of supply is particularly important. Interestingly, China is a very, very important player among developing countries in terms of its share of services trade and a rapidly growing role in services trade. I've put a little red circle in the chart on the right-hand side at the top. You may not be able to read it, sorry about the size of the font, but on that right-hand side, the top line, that's China's growth. And you can see that China's global exports have increased dramatically from about 1.7 to 6.4% over this period. Singapore, the Republic of Korea, Hong Kong, China, and India are other important players. But you'll also see that developing countries have seen their role in global services exports increase dramatically over this period. So just like we've seen the integration of global goods trade, with developing countries increasingly participating in global goods trade, we also see that happening for global services trade. So this is very, very important. And this is also for imports. You'll see China's a major importer as well as an exporter. We see that services has a similar attribute to goods trade in that you import often in order to export. So not only do the imports help you enhance the competitiveness of your domestic economy, whether those firms are services or manufacturing firms compete in your domestic economy, they also help your manufacturing and services firms compete in the global economy. LDCs have a very rapidly growing but very small share in global services trade. So and particularly when it relates to the fact that the digital transformation that we see going on is very important to services trade, we're going to have to find ways to build capacity in the LDCs so that they can also participate and benefit from this growing trade. Now, you did hear that trade costs in services are almost double those in goods. Part of the good news is that even though those trade costs are higher, they have been declining, and they've fallen about 9% from 2000 to 2017. Now, this is some new research that we've been doing at the WTO on trading costs. We actually developed this capability so that we could monitor the implementation of the trade facilitation agreement. But it's also useful to monitor trade costs across a variety of activities. And if you look in the report, and if you send me an email, I can give you more detail because we break this research out into far more sectors than what you see here. The bad news is my expectation that while we see this downward trend, particularly in services and some in agriculture, and a slight downward trend in manufacturing, my guess is that starting in about 2018 and 2019, those trade costs are going to start to go up. So the world is going from an environment of falling trade costs, and my expectation is we'll see trade costs start to rise, which is rather unfortunate. Governance quality and your connectivity, your ICT connectivity, play a very important role in services compared to goods. And interestingly here, governance quality in services is very important. It's about 10% of total trade costs, and ICT connectivity is about 6%. So in both cases, they play a much bigger role in contributing to trade costs. So paying attention to your regulatory environment and your ICT connectivity is going to be very important to bringing down trade costs and services in the future. But it also relates to the importance of capacity building in developing countries. And you'll see also that trade policy and regulatory differences play an important role in both services in goods trade. And the WTO is very much about negotiating reductions in those trade policy and regulatory differences costs. Now, we expect in the global economy that there's going to be an increase in the share of services in world trade, potentially reaching 50% of all world trade by 2040. So services trade is going to grow rapidly. It's going to take an increasing share of global trade and be a very important player in global trade by 2040. And if you're interested, I suggest you read the report to see how we go through and make those estimations. Despite the reforms, policy barriers remain very high in services compared to trade in goods, and collaboration has not been fully exploited. This gives you an idea of GATT's commitments. You can see that recently exceeded members, including China, but also developed country members make a lot of GATT's commitments, but that developing countries and least developed countries don't make as many GATT's commitments in terms of opening up their service sectors to trade as other countries. So we need new pathways to seize the opportunities given by these current changes. We need greater negotiations, greater international cooperation, and we also need to make sure that we focus on technical assistance and capacity building. Services is an essential part of trade, increasingly important, and it's time to make services a central element of trade policy in the global trade debate. Thank you very much. Keith?
Bob, many thanks. That was well done. Right on 10 minutes. We have time, about 5 minutes left, time for one or two questions or comments. Would anyone like to raise a question or have a comment on the report? No? Well, I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Mr. Chong, Bob Koopman, and Ambassador Zhang. Thank you very much for enlightening us on this. Thanks to all of you for coming, and apologies again for our late start. Have a very good day.